You felt it, didn't you? The moment something in you refused to kneel the way it used to. Not loudly, not with spectacle, not with the kind of rebellion people post and perform and decorate with borrowed confidence. No, it happened in silence, in the invisible chamber where your real life has always been decided. A shift so small the world would call it nothing, but the unseen recognized it as a rupture. Because what you just did was not ordinary. You stopped feeding what was feeding on you. You withdrew your agreement from a pattern that had worn your face for years, and that is why everything feels strange now. That is why the air around your life feels charged. That is why the people who were comfortable with your confusion are suddenly uneasy, even if they cannot explain why. You think breakthrough begins when doors open. It does not. It begins when the false self loses control of the script. It begins when the version of you that was built to survive rejection, avoid conflict, earn approval, and keep peace at the cost of your own soul starts to crack, and when it cracks, heaven notices before people do, because most people celebrate masks. They reward obedience, predictability, emotional convenience. They call you mature when you silence your instincts. They call you kind when you abandon your boundaries. They call you difficult the moment your silence expires. But something in you has started to see through the transaction. You are beginning to recognize how often you were loved for your usefulness, praised for your compliance, included for your self-betrayal. And the second you saw it clearly, even for a moment, you committed a dangerous act. You became less available to manipulation. That is what shocked heaven. Not that you became perfect, not that you became fearless, but that in the middle of your exhaustion, your grief, your confusion, your private war with yourself, you still chose not to return to the lie. You still chose not to numb what your spirit was trying to reveal. You still chose to sit in the tension rather than run back to the familiar prison. Do you understand how rare that is? Most people would rather repeat the wound than face the emptiness that appears when the wound is no longer directing their identity. Most people cling to pain because pain at least gives them a role. Victim, savior, pleaser, martyr, fixer. The abandoned child in an adult body still begging the world to prove their worth. But you, something in you has become intolerant of counterfeit connection. You are no longer satisfied being chosen by people who only value the parts of you that make them comfortable. And this is where your life changes, though it may not yet look changed. Because the real turning point is not external evidence. It is internal refusal. Refusal to shrink so others can remain unchallenged. Refusal to keep explaining your worth to those committed to misunderstanding you. Refusal to confuse being needed with being loved. Refusal to hand your inner authority to voices that only grew louder because you forgot your own. This refusal is sacred. It is violent in the holiest way. It tears contracts you did not know you signed. It disturbs loyalties rooted in fear. It exposes every hidden arrangement where your suffering was the price of belonging. You have spent enough years mistaking adaptation for identity. You learned early how to read rooms, anticipate moods, soften truths, suppress anger, and carry the emotional weight others dropped at your feet. You became fluent in survival. So fluent, in fact, that people mistook your trauma response for your personality. Some even called it your calling. But what they praised was often your fracture. What they admired was your ability to function while split against yourself. One part of you smiling, one part grieving, one part serving, one part starving, one part forgiving too fast because it feared abandonment more than betrayal, one part pretending not to notice what was obvious because truth would demand action. This is the inner fragmentation nobody claps for, yet it shapes entire destinies. Now the fragments are moving. The silenced parts are no longer willing to remain buried beneath your polished image. The anger you were taught to fear is returning, not to destroy you, but to defend what should never have been surrendered. The grief you postponed is surfacing, not to drown you, but to wash false attachments out of your system. The confusion is lifting, because confusion was never your nature. It was the fog created when your intuition kept colliding with the version of reality you were pressured to accept. And once that fog begins to clear, manipulation becomes impossible to ignore. You start seeing how guilt was used to control you, how inconsistency was used to destabilize you, how selective affection kept you hungry, how being misunderstood became a tool to keep you explaining, proving, exhausting yourself for scraps of recognition. You start seeing that not every invitation was love, not every apology was repentance, not every delay was divine timing. Some things were obstruction dressed as intimacy. This is why your breakthrough is next, because breakthroughs do not come to the self that is still bargaining with deception. They come after the inner courtroom shifts. They come after the inner courtroom shifts, after the evidence is finally admitted, after the witness in you stops lying to protect the guilty, after you stop cross-examining your own instincts to defend people who benefited from your doubt. The moment you honor what you know, power begins to return. Not borrowed power, not performative power, integrated power, the kind that comes when your inner world is no longer at war with itself, when the face you show and the truth you feel begin, at last, to meet. And yes, this terrifies the structures around you. Because your old identity was convenient, your fragmentation made you predictable, your need to be understood made you controllable, your habit of overgiving made you exploitable. But the version of you emerging now cannot be governed by the same forces. You are learning to detect the difference between peace and sedation, between love and access, between loyalty and bondage, between compassion and self-erasure. You are realizing that some of your greatest suffering came not from being rejected, but from remaining where your spirit was repeatedly violated in the name of connection. So, if everything feels heavier and clearer at once, do not panic. This is what happens when the soul stops negotiating with what the mind normalized. This is what happens when your hidden self steps out of exile and demands a life that matches the truth. Heaven is not shocked because you made a public move. Heaven is shocked because you made an inner one. You interrupted a cycle that had survived on your unconscious participation. You broke pattern in secret. You chose reality over anesthesia, and now the next thing approaching your life is not punishment for your honesty. It is the opening created by it. You can feel it failing now. The face you wore so long is no longer protecting you. It is suffocating you from the inside. What once looked like composure now feels like captivity. The expression you perfected, the tone you learned to use, the careful way you made yourself digestible to unstab the people, all of it is beginning to rot in your mouth. You know exactly what I mean. That exhausting moment when you hear yourself speaking in ways that no longer belong to you. When you say yes, and something in your chest recoils. When you smile and your spirit does not follow. When you act calm, but beneath the surface, there is a tightening, a silent revolt, a pressure building from years of self-abandonment, disguised as maturity. This is what happens when the constructed self starts losing oxygen. It was built for survival, not truth. Built in rooms where love had conditions. Built in environments where your safety depended on reading moods faster than your own needs. Built from the repeated realization that being fully yourself carried consequences, so you became strategic instead. You learned which parts of your nature invited punishment, which emotions made others withdraw, which truths made the atmosphere dangerous. So you adapted, you edited, you removed pieces of yourself until the version left behind could move through life with minimal resistance. And because it helped you survive, you called it your personality. But survival identities always demand tribute. They do not disappear when the danger passes. They become internal authorities. They keep policing you long after the original threat is gone. They interrupt your instincts before your instincts can speak. They translate your anger into guilt, your clarity into hesitation, your boundaries into shame. They make you feel disloyal for wanting peace. They make honesty feel cruel and self-protection feel selfish. This is how the mask maintains power, not by forcing itself onto your face, but by convincing you that without it you will lose love, safety, belonging, and control. And for a long time, you believed that. You believed your restraint was virtue, when often it was fear wearing clean clothes. You believed your endless understanding made you wise, when often it only made you easier to keep in painful cycles. You believed your ability to absorb disappointment without visible reaction made you strong, when in truth it made others comfortable violating you without consequence. You became so practiced in self-suppression that your suffering stopped looking dramatic enough for anyone to notice, including you, especially you. That is the cruelty of the mask. It does not only hide you from others, it hides you from yourself. It teaches you to mistrust your own discomfort, to reinterpret your own inner alarms as overreaction, to call your exhaustion a season, to call your numbness peace, to call your distance wisdom, to call your collapse discipline. Anything but what it is, anything but the simple, devastating truth that the role you have been living is draining the life out of you, and now it is getting harder to perform. Not because you are weak, because you are waking up. The old lines do not come as easily. The old explanations feel stale. The old reflex to make everyone else comfortable before you check whether you are dying inside is no longer automatic. There is a delay now, a sacred interruption, a split second where the real you rises and says, no. Maybe not out loud yet, maybe not with force yet, but the interruption is there, and it changes everything. Because once the false self is interrupted, it can never again move with the same unconscious authority. Once you see the act, you cannot fully disappear into it. This is why some interactions now leave you feeling strangely contaminated, not because you are becoming too sensitive, but because your nervous system is no longer willing to romanticize what your soul has already judged unsafe. You are beginning to notice the cost of each performance. The fatigue after pretending not to mind, the heavens, after making yourself smaller, the quiet disgust that follows every moment you betray your own knowing, just to keep the peace. These are not random emotional fluctuations. They are signals. Your interior world is refusing the arrangement, and the deeper truth is this. The mask was never only about how others saw you. It was about how you escaped the parts of yourself you were taught to fear, the anger that might disrupt approval, the hunger that might expose how much you have gone without, the grief that might reveal how long you have been unloved in places where you kept offering devotion, the power that might force a decision, the truth that might end a bond you have spent years trying to rescue. So you stayed in the mask, not only to manage other people, but to avoid the earthquake of becoming visible to yourself. But visibility has begun. Now you are catching yourself in private moments, feeling the distance between who you are and who you have been presenting. You are noticing the hollowness of reactions that used to feel normal. You are sensing that some of your goodness was built on terror, that some of your patience was prolonged self-erasure, that some of your loyalty was fear of what would happen if you finally withdrew your emotional labor and discovered who never truly cared. This is not an easy revelation. It humiliates the ego. It strips the false nobility from old suffering. It forces you to admit that some of the pain you called destiny was actually maintenance of a self-concept built to keep you acceptable. So let it feel unbearable for a moment. Let the mask tremble. Let the practiced smile fail at the edges. Let your voice lose its rehearsed smoothness. Because what is collapsing is not your identity. It is your impersonation. What is dying is not your goodness. It is the counterfeit version of goodness that required your disappearance. What is being suffocated is not your future. It is the inherited script that told you your value depended on how convincingly you could abandon yourself and still look calm. There is a reason the pressure is increasing. The real self does not whisper forever. Eventually it begins to press against the walls of the life built without its consent. Eventually the hidden truth in you grows too large to fit inside managed reactions and polite distortions. Eventually the cost of pretending exceeds the fear of being seen. That is where you are now, between the identity that kept you alive and the truth that will finally let you live. And this threshold is brutal, because the mask will make one final argument before it falls. It will tell you that without it, you will become unlovable, too intense, too difficult, too much. It will show you old memories as proof, old punishments, old abandonments, old consequences for honesty. It will call your awakening recklessness. It will frame your integration as loss. It will make the cage sound like wisdom, because cages always rename themselves when they sense escape. Do not believe it. The suffocation you feel is evidence. Your body knows the role has expired.